Three, two, one, liftoff.
Cannabinoid Connect, the nation's most diverse cannabis-related podcast.
And here we go. Joe, it's great to have you, man. It's been a pleasure just talking to you off recording, and it's a pleasure to have you.
You as well, man, and thank you for having me. I did a little bit of background research, not gonna lie. Been really interested in a couple of the companies you've had on, a couple of the speakers you've had on, especially within the last year or so. I didn't dive back too far, but really like the machine focus, the tech focus. Kind of fits my niche. I'm a super nerd.
You were telling me earlier. I mean, you're the math whiz in the house. Well, of course, your wife has other strengths that keep you guys simpatico and whatnot. But it's funny because I never was the math or science whiz. I was always on the communications side, surprisingly, right?
If you had told me almost 20 years ago, and I was graduating for the first time at OSU, that my career focus would be cannabis, I'd have laughed, mostly because I was paying for my college with cannabis. But that I would get to spend most of my days playing with one of the coolest puzzles I've ever got a chance to dive into. And that's kind of honestly one of the things that's kept me interested in cannabis for so long is I haven't found the bottom of the pool.
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, if you're into problem solving, this is the industry for you for sure. Because I mean, you have it not only on the scientific level, which we'll get into today, in terms of decontamination practices and whatnot post harvest, but the fact that even politically, there's like a chess game and there's different ways in which and regulations you got to go about and figure things out because it's ever changing. So it's just, it's a very interesting space.
Ever changing, and it's I think 38 simultaneous chess games now at this point. There's only a few holdovers left. All of them a little bit different, all with their own uniquities and microcosms, and that's been fun in its own. Although travel does get old to an extent. The unfortunate part is you only fly into cool places, and then you drive about an hour and a half away from them to the middle of nowhere. That's where cannabis tends to take you as work. Every once in a while, it's all right. Massachusetts, you get to hang out around Boston, kind of a small state, but there's a magical moment where you fly into what was the name airport? Oh, Southern California, San something. Anyway, and then you drive to the edge of
San Jose.
No, can't be Bravo.
All right. Anyway, yeah.
Where everyone's on the edge of the Mojave Desert, because that's where you end up driving to, and there is a quick stop, the hotel that you're staying at. A diner that has been there since, and I don't think has been painted or renovated since. I'm guessing 19 something. And you're trying to find the facility, and you can't. And then you realize it's been buried underground in shipping containers for the whole eternal, but not quite deep enough. So there's a problem.
Well, that's a good, that brings up a good point. Like, what do y'all do to entertain yourself besides probably consume the product and bond, but you'd have to kind of stay busy and stay entertained in those rural areas where there's not much going on, right?
So I've kind of developed two travel hobbies, we'll call them. And we'll bring my wife back into it, I guess. She helps with one of them. I've become a foodie. If you have a local cuisine, a hot spot, a 5-star review on Yelp, I'm going to end up there. Thusly, the diner.
I like that. I'm with that. Yes.
It's been cool.
Because those are out there. Those hole in the walls are everywhere, especially those small towns. I mean, you just got to ask the right people or, find the right rating on, like you said, Google or Yelp, and it's amazing experience.
You end up with some really, really cool things. I didn't realize Detroit had an amazing food scene. I grew up in Ohio, and my view of Detroit was always, well, we hate Michigan, so it's okay. It's not their fault. I mean, we did get another national championship. I guess it's been a few decades for them, but it's all right. We don't brag too much.
Humble brag, right? Yeah.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Well,
Oh,
so tell me, Joe, like how did you get started in this space? I mean, like you said, you never would have really saw yourself in college to now kind of making this trajectory being a science guy, but was it the challenges and the problem solving that intrigued you? Is it that you were a previous consumer and you saw the value and the benefit of the plant? Yeah.
um, weirdly enough, total opposite. Grew up rural Ohio, farm life, and you hit about age 12, 13, growing up and thusly working on a farm, where man, you just want to run away as fast as humanly possible. Um, I want to owe my grandfather a conversation one of these days about having run around the world to not be a farmer to be a farmer. But no, grew up with a deep agricultural background, had a really kind of soil up understanding of cultivation in a sense of preservation. Not necessarily the corn and soy that Ohio is so known for, but kind of that farmers market, vegetable, fresh farm to table produce, and always had a big appreciation for it. But initially went to college because I wanted to design video games, and computer science engineering was the first one through. And man, did I hate it. Absolutely couldn't stand it. I made it about 9 months in my first place of employment, and I figured out exactly how long I would have to be there. And that's when I started smoking weed.
Is it because of just the repetitive task of like just sitting at a desk and like
It,
programming and
it,
coding?
it was absolute monotony. You kind of have that view. Grandma's Boy came out roughly about that time, and you have this view of video game design. It's not. And you don't even get to do that off the bat. You get to sit in a little 3.5 foot by 3.5 foot by 3.5 foot gray cubicle, and you get an hour lunch break. That's that's about the highlights.
Dang.
And it was fun because it was logic and Boolean based logic, and it was something I excelled at. And I realized that I'd turned something that I loved into something that I abhorred. I would come home from work and I would sit down and I wouldn't touch an electronic device. I don't know if you can see behind me. I'm an
I can,
avid.
yeah, I saw your collection is pretty impressive there.
It's shrunk over the years, mostly because they're heavy and hard to move, and but that became my catharsis. So I started thinking about what was the next step. I had at that point in time felt like I had, in a sense, failed, but knew that I had skills, knew that I had ideas, knew what I wanted to do, knew what I didn't want to do. And that was probably the bigger one, was finding out all the things that I didn't want to do and all the things that I thought would suit me but didn't. And went back down the college path again, went into education, thought I was suited for English, and almost turned another love into something that I didn't want to do. And just took a giant step back. Um, and then realized that there was something I'd been doing all the time that I didn't really understand. Uh, Having financed my college career through private horticultural endeavors, it became pretty
Allegedly.
obvious. Yeah, yeah, allegedly. What's the statute on that? Yeah, well, allegedly. But having realized that there was something that I hadn't explored yet. And initially it was, how can I relate cultivation? How can I relate the production of a given biomass to benefit? And at that point in time, it was monetary, but again, trying to bring things back around to that farm life and rural upbringing. How can a plant benefit, well, humanity, society? and started really looking at cannabis. And at that point in time, there was no medical research, completely prohibition era, not even really academic outside of hemp and a few unique programs at a couple of universities. But what there was a plethora of knowledge on was bulk organic compound production. And I started studying cut flowers. Orchids and lilies were actually the first kind of deep dive for me. And that brought me to soil mechanics. Soil mechanics brought me into lighting spectrum. Lighting spectrum brought me to atmosphere control. Atmosphere control brought me to fertigation and nutrient control. And I just kept diving and diving and diving and diving in. And I didn't really know where I was going with it. I was kind of spinning my wheels through continual education, not knowing what I was going to do with all of this time and money that I invested. And then right about 2009, when Colorado legalized medical marijuana, my wife looked at me and goes, "Shit, or get off the pot. Let's move to Colorado." Really? And I was taken back because outside of going to college in Pittsburgh, um, she was not a traveler and explorer. I mean, I had been when I was younger, but I was kind of flabbergasted. But it really was that, eureka epiphany moment for me that I obviously have a passion to the degree that my partner is willing to uproot herself and make that change. It's semi-convenient, being an artist, and not a whole lot to tie you down. Well, this may surprise you, but Ohio does not have what we would call a robust art scene.
That's so
Colorado,
shocking.
oh man, I know, amazing, right?
But that's amazing that she, was so open and supportive, like right off the bat, right? I mean, especially because this industry comes with some baggage in terms of the stigma around the plant, right? I mean, I know that that's kind of disappearing as there's more public support, but especially probably at that time, your wife saw the opportunity, she knew your skill set, and she's like, let's do this thing.
And yeah, it's spot on, and it gave me a lot of courage in that. But to your point, you're absolutely right that there was a long time where there was a horrible stigma of working in cannabis. I know several individuals who, in those opening years through '09 and the recreational hit in 14 in Colorado, and it was the quote unquote Amsterdam of the West, or actually of the East, yeah, East, there we go, Amsterdam of the East. But we kind of grown out of that to a sense. I guess to a degree. Sorry, backpedal. I kind of got lost in memory. A great friend of mine, um, who actually worked for Yofumo for quite some time as well, as one of our assembly techs and lead field technicians after we both kind of moved out of cannabis cultivation, had a lot of difficulty going back home to Florida and getting a quote unquote normal job because 6 years of his resume had been in an illicit industry and Florida was not permissible. Had a lot of trouble actually. Now he's since pivoted that into a lot of sales based research and kind of think tank based research and project management and kind of really made the better of it there. But it's crazy to think that we've now kind of come all the way through the looking glass. Um, I remember telling my parents that I was cultivating cannabis for a living. That was an incredibly interesting conversation.
Yeah, how did they take that?
Well, I found out my mom smokes weed,
Okay, all right.
not good weed.
So you're like, Mom, like, hey, let me help you out here.
Yeah, and my dad said something along the lines of, "Yeah, I figured it'd be something like this with you eventually."
Well, then they weren't so surprised. That's a good thing then. It was your
No,
calling, Joe.
but it's I, well, I feel so, but no, it was again really encouraging. On top of that, that all of the kind of key people in my life, and my parents, my partner, were supportive of what was in every way outside of a couple of counties in Colorado, and if you went too far down 70, federally illicit, well, still federally illicit in Colorado, but it was a huge risk and probably one of the biggest ones I've ever taken, and very risk, great reward. I couldn't be happier.
Well, that's amazing to hear. I always love a good, success story, and you're still in it, right? And so I think this is a good segue to talk about, the real focus in what you are doing in terms of, addressing the issue of keeping cannabis clean and addressing contamination risks. So, I guess a way to start this is like just tell us about the impact of contamination on product quality, compliance, and even consumer health.
Oh man, that's a fun little deep dive. You want to start with something scary or something upsetting?
Uh, I could go either way.
All right,
Let's go upsetting.
all right. Here's something upsetting. Because of microbial regulations and how tests are delineated with no speciation on most yeasts and molds, it is near impossible to use a plethora of organic cultivation methodologies, microbial teas, deep water cultivation, living soil, any proenzymatic or probiotic additives, because the test simply shows a total count, not if it's bad, not if it's good. Now, a lot of labs have kind of developed their PCR or PCR IQ assays to really focus on what are pathogenic yeasts and molds. However, there's still a horrible discrepancy in how we test. Some labs will utilize PCRI, PCRQ, which is a thermocycler rapidly doing DNA sequences and kind of extrapolating out what could be and performing that cultivation, performing that extrapolation at an incredibly rapid rate. And there are other labs that use plate-based incubation methods using M3 agar. Takes days at a time, but it's near impossible to count. Some, and this has become a less prevalent practice, but some labs still use what they call film plate analysis, which is where you print out a piece of film, you put it over the plate, and there's a random dispersion of dots or colored segments, and that's what you look at under the microscope. And wherever that happens to fall is what you count. And then you multiply it by whatever the delta is. So that's 10% of the total area, and then you multiply out to 100. The dot may show dead in the middle of the colony. The dot may show absolutely in the middle of nowhere, completely unreliable. Then when you couple that with the idea that in most cases, sample size is not representative harvest batch, i.e., you can submit 7 to 14 grams in some states, and that's representative of hundreds of pounds. Um, Microbes don't distribute evenly over biomass. Cultivars, plants, just like people, have varying degrees of susceptibility. And even within the same genome, species, and chemotype, we still see a huge range in what could potentially be healthy or unhealthy. Where is it in the room? How was it treated? Did it get missed water? Did it get light burn? Did it just simply not have enough airflow to prevent yeast and mold buildup? Did it see a contamination based on improperly treated soil medium? All of these things can happen. So right next to a healthy plant, you can have a contaminated plant. Now, while random spatial sampling is supposed to help alleviate this, it's completely inaccurate to what you may or may not have.
Okay, so I'm trying to try to follow you here because you are very science based, which I appreciate, but you gotta give grace to guys like me. So it sounds like what you're saying is because there is discrepancies within microbial testing across the board, there's kind of like not a standard. People kind of do their own testing methods. There's a lot of inaccuracies when it comes to the final results and kind of how we can regulate, and even the regulation is off, you're saying, as well, because of these testing methods?
Part and parcel and all, but a little bit less of twos. There are multiple methods that are accredited. There's no standard for what method to use.
Okay.
Oftentimes, it's based on laboratory equipment, personnel training and abilities, funding, state requirements, to a degree. What that yields, however, is what we now call lab shopping.
Yep.
If you
I've heard of
if you
this
fail to
term.
test at lab A, well, let's go to lab B. They might use a different chemical assay for their PCR. They might use a different analytical method that might be more beneficial to you. So this creates a potential issue here for consumer health. And then from the other side, we have a sample size without replicate that, while attempting to be a representation of the batch or the harvest, often falls very short. Now, here's the upsetting one. One of the things that can fall short on is Aspergillus niger, known a little bit better as black mold. This can occur in cannabis. Yes, the thing that will send you out of your home, the thing
And
that is known to cause aspergillosis and multiple pulmonary respiratory impacts can occur, does occur in cannabis.
And I've heard, I did some research as well, and I heard one of the podcasts that you were previously on, but it was in 2023, and I was kind of shocked by the percentage that was thrown out. It was, I think you said, or someone said on the podcast, 60% of cannabis products at the time, like had some type of contamination or I don't know if it was mold, but like, and those
I
are
actually,
even legal.
I think I
Go
actually
ahead.
remember that statistic. The increase in incubation time from 48 to 72 hours resulted in an additional 60% failure of sample set, which means that simply giving it a little bit more time to mature and cultivate resulted in a massive increase in failure rate.
Oh, I see. So when it was post harvest, it was probably okay within the threshold, but then as they tried to cure and dry for an extended period, is when contamination
Well,
increased.
and you kind of hit the nail on the head there. We do see the most abundant and rapid microbial expansion during drying and curation phases. And the way I try to explain it to, or kind of bring clients into it as we start talking about contamination, as we start talking about facility health and biosecurity, is that in a sense you can look at it as a parasitic host relationship. And the microbe being the parasite, the plant being the host. While possible and common in circumstances, we don't really see incredibly high microbial counts on living plants. And there's obviously exceptions to the rule. Botrytis may occur. There's all types of infections that may exist. Um, a systemic issue, comes to play in that. But in general, with healthy plants, healthy crops, and stable cultivars, it's fairly rare to see microbial counts in excess of a few thousand. Part of the reason is the microbe isn't desperate. It still has room to spread. It's got plenty of fuel from a chemical level, water being fuel for all carbon-based life. And it's not really worried about its own existence. Now, the moment you cut that plant down, it now has a finite amount of resources as far as the microbe concerned, the parasite's concerned. So, like most life on the planet, when it sees the end coming near, it tries to replicate and spread as fast as it can. Now, we also look at the difference in climate change between cultivation environments and post-harvest environments, which is one of the things that actually brought us to kind of developing the technology for Yofumo. They can often be incredibly different. They can often be abrupt in change in temperature and humidity. But even more than that, we're taking the plant out of the crib. We're moving it through a warehouse. We're touching it. We're handling it. Even with proper PPE and proper sanitization, humans are filthy, and us touching things is typically not good. So that was kind of one of the concepts that really led us to Yofumo. And if we rewind the clock now again back to that 2014-ish era, we see a lot of differences in how cultivation environments are constructed and operated. There wasn't the purpose-built technology that now exists 10 years ago. We were using HVAC units from server farms, and they were great at shedding heat, horrible at taking care of moisture. We were using lighting systems from the cut flower industry, and what absolutely a corollary, not designed in spectrum penetration of canopy. We were using soil mediums across the board, peat moss, Proterra, cocoa noir, ground coconut husk, true dirt, living soil, clay beads, spun lava rock, all kinds of things trying to figure out what was best. And as we began to progress through that cultivation phase, as we really started to develop those technologies for the industry, there became a huge gap in what was being put into pre-harvest phases, living phases, and post-harvest phases. So now we have an industry that is hyper focused on how can we produce the biggest plant, best plant, highest volatile organic compound flower, terpenes, flavonoids, cannabinoids, largest buds. What can we do from an anthocyan reaction to make things purple? All kinds of cool things are happening. But then we're cutting down the plant and we're going back to the Stone Age. We're putting things in buckets, bins. We're shaking them. They're going to closets with the humidifier from Home Depot.
Right.
As we
Lot,
looked at,
lot of room for error, right? In that type of process. So this is another great segue. So, I mean, that seems like there was a clear opportunity that was a need that was needed to be filled, right? And so, Yofumo, talk to me about its differentiator because I know that you have some type of ozone-based decontamination system.
yeah,
Um,
we absolutely do, and it's a cool methodology. Um, wasn't always kind of designed that way. Again, like kind of going from that modernization to a revert to Stone Age. Originally, we wanted to do curation. We wanted to foster the biosynthesis reaction in a stable and hermetic way. That post-harvest phase, that dry, that cured. How can we do that? How can we accelerate it? How can we bring consistency to this product? And so it's no longer a bin and bucket burping system, kind of arbitrarily to someone's nose. Did it go too long, too short? What happens in the process? So that was kind of the original thought. And that led us to the idea that, well, how do we maintain that environment? Okay, we can build a hermetic chamber, but a hermetic chamber is only a chamber. What if the cannabis itself already has a contamination? Unfortunately, a lot of the variables that control curation, the two primary ones being temperature and humidity, are also the ones that control microbial expansion to a high degree. So if there's something there, we're only going to exacerbate the issue. So this brought us kind of to a compliance question. And there was kind of a weird occurrence in the industry at the time. Colorado, for whatever reason, decided to implement microbial testing for recreational cannabis, not medical, though. Medical didn't require that. So seeing those regulations come through, knowing that's really where we wanted to focus the technology because there wasn't anybody really developing the sector at that time for post-harvest. We started looking at compliance. And as we looked at compliance, as we looked at FDA statutes for foods, vegetables, leafy greens, and kind of looking at the development thereof and how those industries really came up and where those standardizations came from, and looking at the ASTM standards and what is the threshold for compliance. I I probably read the EU GMP pharmacopoeia as well as the US pharmacopoeia. Um, man, more times than I care to think about, but it's really what provides the basis for sanitization, safety, health. And while cannabis has really taken a recreational turn, It was originally, and it still is in some places, a medical only product. So if we're looking at a medical product, then we need to look at consumer health, consumer safety, viability, and this brought us again back to compliance. One of the things that became very apparent very quickly is that pretty much every agricultural industry has a means of sanitization of the biomass that they're cultivating, be it chlorine dioxide rinse, be it large radiation exposure, be it pasteurization. There's something there. There's a control step that is implemented en masse without question. So we looked forward, and it was a scary look to a degree because we didn't really know how we were going to accomplish that. We knew that gaseous exposure, something like chlorine dioxide, which works great with your fruits and vegetables and soft grind and hard grind objects, because you can rinse it, because you can wash it. There's very little risk of remainted chemical compound or really any risk to the human biome with proper usage. Always wash your fruits and vegetables, by the way.
Yes.
But we also saw that when you looked at what the global scale was doing, that a lot of these things were being regulated into extinction. Chlorine dioxide really wasn't a viable methodology for anybody producing an organic product or an heirloom product. Certain EU countries had already began limiting its permissibility. Look at radiation, an absolutely wonderful technology in a lot of ways. The grain industry would be in a very different place without it. But we also kind of fell against the idea of radiation. So we started looking at what's the scale of contamination. And at that point in time, there wasn't really a huge definitive list like there is for most regulatory environments now. We were just looking at aerobic bacteria. We were just looking at total yeast and mold count. And we were looking for a few other big things. We were looking for E. coli. We were looking for STEC, things that we knew to be absolutely pathogenically harmful. There's a lot more pathogens than that, and we've kind of developed through there. Now we test for aerobic, enterobic, gram-negative, biotolerant, total yeast and mold, coliform, pseudomonas variants, aspergillus variants. We still test for E. coli and STEC, but it's kind of really become much more robust in what we look at and what is in the realm of occurrence. So we took that as notes and we started looking at, okay, how can we interact with this? And we really liked ozone from the sense that it's readily available. It's cheap in the sense of equipment design and build doesn't break a bank. When you look at systems like Zeo or systems like crowdsource, they can be incredibly expensive. And they're highly calibrated scientific machines. It makes perfect sense. A lot of cultivators don't necessarily have a huge chunk of disposable income. One of, I think, the falsehoods that's kind of existent in the cannabis industry is it just makes money hand over fist. And that was true in a lot of places for some time, but it's become like every other agrarian industry, highly competitive and highly controlled because it's a commodity, and now that commodity is becoming close to federally available. So with that in mind, kind of moved back from radiation, and that kind of stuck us back on the drawing board because there was at that time no way that ozone was really being used to interact with the gamut of microbial contaminants that we needed to. So the idea became, is there a way that we can achieve with ozone a similar result to radiation, specifically ionic radiation? So we started looking at what does it do to cellular structure, and it's disruption of the cell. It's corruption of the DNA, and it's true death on that to that regard. It's in our carbon at that point. Um, and we thought we could. So we kind of went back to ozone, but we started looking at it in a different way. Instead of looking at ozone through a lens of what's called atmospheric deprivation, pumping enough ozone into a confined space where you kill everything across the aerobic spectrum. And the spectrum needs oxygen to live. Is there a way that we could interact with more than that? Now, here's problem number one. Ozone's a free radical oxidizer. What that means is it's completely non-discriminate. It doesn't care what it interacts with everything that it encounters, period and paragraph. Now, how does it react becomes the next question. What's the threshold of ozone requisite to interact with yeasts, molds, other microbial compounds, developed bacteria? Is that threshold lower than the threshold where we start seeing cellular degradation of the plant itself, or we start seeing the decomposition or oxidization of terpenes, flavonoids, cannabinoids, volatile organic compounds, the entire reason we grow and smoke cannabis?
Right.
And the answer is yeah. Yeah, it is lower. Now the question became, how do you control it? And there's a couple ways that you can generate ozone. Traditional ozone pumps convert X% of atmospheric oxygen based on pump size, based on purity of feedstock. 21.6% tends to be the average for most commercial grade ozone pumps. There are many that go higher. There's some that go lower, but it's an on or off. You're not regulating what it's doing. The machine works, the machine doesn't work. You can't kind of turn the dial from 1 to 100 and say, I only want you to convert this much. You can feed it oxygen, you can control what it's getting from a fuel standpoint, what it's converting, and you can approximate to a degree what it does. But that wasn't going to be sufficient. We weren't looking to control, plus or minus a few hundred, plus or minus a few thousand. We wanted to control to single ppm. So we started looking at other ways that ozone is generated. One of the things that we kind of stumbled upon was UVC elements, light bulbs. So everything vibrates. UVC elements, when powered, vibrate at a frequency that actually creates ozone, or can vibrate at a frequency that actually creates ozone. So between about the 183 and 207 nanometer range, you can create ozone with UVC elements. It's stable between about 184 and 187, actually stable. We landed on about 185, which is where we really kind of felt that that sweet spot was for production versus longevity. And that was all fun and games and math on paper. How do we actually do it? So we went in search of someone that could make this magic wand for us. Stumbled upon a company called Lanka Ultraviolet, which, unbeknownst to us, was one of the largest producers in the world of the UVC elements. So they were actually able to create for us a completely proprietary generation element that allowed us to control the exact gram per minute per cubic foot production of ozone within the unit. And then it became
Game changer.
6 years of research figuring out contaminant X, contaminant Y, contaminant Z, reevaluation, third-party evaluation. Do we see degradation of VOCs? We see degradation of VOCs through third-party analysis, EU GMP validation, CE validation. I essentially took the entire budget for the company for like a little over a decade and just sunk it into material science research. I am still getting some flack for that.
Well, I mean, you got to build the case studies, right? You got to build the research to then point back to kind of prove that the methodology works, and there has been some success in the studies. So I get why you would do
And
that.
absolutely, and we had to, and we still do it to this very day, overcome some hurdles. There's other ozone producing companies out there that utilize different methodologies that people have a degree of negative negative thoughts about. Um, and there's a lot of research around all the terrible things ozone can do. So we've had to kind of really prove our way every step of the way in the sense that even once we thought we had a robust system, and as we were going through our trial basis and our alpha and beta units before we finally landed on what became our final go-to-market product, we were near giving the things away. Just, hey, try it. It's, I hate to sound like a used car salesman, but money back guarantee. Like I know we know what we're doing, but convincing people to put thousands of dollars. I mean, we have a throughput capacity of 30 to 50 pounds, depending on biomass density. I mean, man, even if you take a market like Colorado, I think we're sitting somewhere around 790 to 1100 a pound, depending. I mean, let's just call it 1,000 flat for math. Convincing someone to put 30 grand in a machine, because you said it'll work, it's not an easy conversation.
I can imagine. Yeah. So I mean, do you see Yofumo's technology maybe influencing agriculture and food safety across the board? Like, is there plans to expand to other industries? Or are there other
Absolutely.
applications beyond cannabis?
Ab- Absolutely. Um, one of our original founders was fond of the saying, "No one's going to pay us to clean tomatoes. They already think they know how to do that. We have to prove we can clean something that hasn't yet existed." And cannabis was, that medium, obviously. Um, but we've been working through some European partners doing seed-based decontamination, pre-planting. We've seen increases in germination. We've seen higher degrees of crop uniformity. We've seen lower rates of pathogenic response or pathogen contamination. We've even seen drops in systemic contamination, still very much in the development stage. But oh yeah, man, absolutely. Um, I always kind of dreamed of the day where I can replace the fruit drawer in your fridge with a Yofumo drawer. And the idea always being farm to table produce is amazing, but you also bring some of the farm to your table. Now, what if you just stick that in a drawer in your fridge, and within minutes you have farm to table, but completely, absolutely sterile clean? And I always thought that was a really cool idea. We haven't gotten there by any means, but these are the dreams. One of the things we've learned in cannabis is dream big, step small. We did expanded our ideas and thought process very quickly early on. Um, and what it taught us was a bit of hubris that we needed to really focus in on one thing. And while I don't by any means feel we've solved cannabis, I feel we've built up the chops to start taking on the next hurdle. And it sounds like that's going to be seeds for us. So we've been talking again through some European partners and seed producers, some US partners and seed distributors as well. Currently in the market for a kind of test bed, test farm. We have a few that we're in discussions with, and I'm really excited. Again, the irony of going right back to being a farmer.
I can see the excitement just glowing off your face, man. I love to see when people are, passionate about what they do, but then they're also making a huge impact. And, hearing you talk about the potential for decontaminating seeds before planting is huge. So really excited to see what comes of that. And I like your advice, in cannabis, dream big, but step small. And I think that's a good, opportunity for you to kind of share some last thoughts as we wrap up this conversation. Is there any, advice or maybe something that you want to reflect on in your current experience that you've kind of touched on with Yofumo that you want the audience to take away from this conversation?
Hmm. I have a
He's
whole notebook.
pondering. He's
I
pondering.
am. I have a whole notebook of prep questions that I did my homework before this and kind of tried to prepare myself. That was not one of them. All right, let's.
So I threw a curveball at you. Good.
Yeah. I thought, all right, let's see what we got here. Um, I think one of the things that excites me most is how rapidly we're discovering variant cannabinoids, variant terpenes, what we're seeing that they can do. It's not just delta 9 tetrahydrocannabinol anymore. It's not just THC. It's not just CBD. We have unearthed a plethora of variants. Some of them have incredibly unique uses. CBDV, for example, THCV, for example. Um, we're starting to see some studies that show that there might be increased insulin responses. Um, the idea that there could be a diabetes medicine within cannabis that is out there to find is incredibly cool. When we start looking at terpene expression, and what is the world of taste? What is the world of aromatic sense? How do those compounds affect neurosynaptic response? How does that change the user experience? How can we adjust, control, and really go to a individualized medicine approach? It is incredibly exciting. And in order to do either of those things, we have to have a clean product. And I've got a front row seat to the future, and that just excites the hell out of me, man.
That's so awesome, man. That just fired me up hearing that. And I've had discussions in the past in this podcast about the potential of, isolating these cannabinoids, these terpenes, these flavonoids, and just how they can address certain ailments in the body. And it's exciting to see someone like you and hear firsthand from someone like you who's on the front lines, who's seeing this from a science perspective and reinforce that narrative. Because I'm just talking to the people that are actually implementing and doing, and so it sounds like the innovation is still there. We have lots to learn about this plant, and hopefully, with this new administration, something will change in terms of either descheduling, legalizing, and really starting to think about what we can do to move the needle and when it comes to healthcare and mental health, because this plant has a lot to offer. So, Joe, thank
That
you for
that
your
that'll,
time, man.
that'll be super awesome. I do have to ask an off-topic question though.
Yeah, go ahead.
Did I
Sure.
see a, did I see a corgi in the background?
It's you know what? He's actually I don't even know. He's not a corgi, but he's like part Chihuahua, and then I don't know the other half what he is, but he's kind of a mutt. His name's
That is,
Toby.
that mine's tight and near identical. That's why I asked. I saw the face. I'm like, oh,
He
that's
has the
gross.
face of a corgi for sure, but it's a little misleading because he's got the Chihuahua body. So
That- That's awesome, man. Well, man, I can't thank you enough for having me and letting me rant and rave for, man, it has been an hour. Holy cow.
it flew by. I learned a lot, man, and I appreciate you coming on and educating the audience. And let's do it again real soon. I'd love to see the evolution of Yofumu and all the great work y'all are doing. So let's keep in touch.
Oh man, that'd be great. And like I said, Roots RX, give them a check out, and I'll see if I can get the ski lift and best run info from our marketing director as well. Enjoy the trip to Colorado, man. It's an awesome time to be here. We're getting some really nice snow, and it just warmed back up from the cold snap. So I mean, ideal time.
Awesome. Yeah, we're looking forward to our week-long vacation in Colorado. I'm gonna be picking up some good product from Roots RX as well. So shout out to them. And yeah, Joe, appreciate all that you do, man. Thank you.
Absolutely, man. Thanks and take care.
Yep, and thank you all for listening. Bye.
Cannabinoid Connect, the nation's most diverse cannabis related podcast.